June 1940. Werner Hoffmann stood at the edge of the Canadian prisoner camp and stared at nothing. There was no barbed wire, there were no tall guard towers with machine guns pointing down at him. There were just open fields that stretched out to the horizon. Green grass moved in the wind. Trees lined a road in the distance. A few wooden buildings sat behind him. And that was it. He turned to the Canadian guard standing nearby. The guard wore a clean uniform. He looked relaxed, almost bored. Werner asked, in broken English where the fence was, where were the walls? The guard looked at Werner like he had asked a strange question. Then the guard shrugged and said something that made Werner's blood run cold. "You can go for a walk if you want," the guard said. "Just be back by dinner." Werner thought it was a trap. It had to be a trap. They wanted him to run so they could shoot him in the back. That's what guards did. That's what he had been told they would do. This was June of 1940, and everything Werner knew about the world was about to fall apart. Just weeks before Werner had been a soldier in the German army. He had worn his uniform with pride. He believed in the cause. He believed what his leaders told him. Germany was strong. Germany was superior. The enemies were weak and cruel. If you got captured, they said you would suffer. You would starve. You would be beaten. They told stories from the Great War from 1914 to 1918 about prisoners who died in mud and cold, about camps where men ate rats to survive, about guards who treated German soldiers like animals. Werner had believed all of it. Why wouldn't he? Everyone in Germany heard the same stories. The radio told them. The newspapers printed it. His officers repeated it during training. Werner thought about his life before all this. Hamburg, 1938. He was 20 years old, then living in a modest apartment near the shipyards with his family. His father built ships for a living. His mother, Anneliese, taught elementary school. She had gentle hands and a patient voice. She could explain anything to anyone. Werner had a younger brother, Ludwig, who was 16 and learning to be a mechanic. The boy had grease under his fingernails and dreams of building motorcycles someday. He was always taking things apart and putting them back together. Sometimes they worked after, sometimes they didn't. His sister, Helene, was 14 and wanted to be a nurse. She practiced bandaging Ludwig's pretend injuries until he got annoyed and ran away. She would chase him through the apartment, laughing, waving rolls of gauze like flags. Werner remembered Sunday dinners. His mother made sauerbraten on his birthday every year. The smell of the roast filled the whole apartment. Vinegar and spices and meat cooking slow for hours. His father would come home from the shipyard with oil still on his hands, and they would eat together at the small wooden table by the window. His father taught him how to fix engines, how to listen to the sound a machine made and know what was wrong with it, how to use his hands to solve problems. Werner was good at it. He was good with his hands. He liked drawing too, sketching buildings and bridges. He dreamed about going to university to study architecture. But university cost money his family didn't have. So in 1938, when he turned 20, Werner joined the army. The pay was stable. The country needed soldiers. And besides, everyone said Germany was building something great. A new future. A new world order. Why wouldn't a young man want to be part of that? The training was hard, but Werner was strong. He learned to shoot. He learned to march. He learned to follow orders without thinking. His officers told him things. They told him Germany had the best of everything. The best soldiers, the best weapons, the best technology. They told him the enemies were weak, that they would crumble under Germany's might. And if somehow Werner got captured, they said the enemy would torture him. They would starve him. They would beat him until he broke. Never surrender, they said. Death is better than capture. Werner believed them. Everyone believed them. He was promoted to corporal in 1939. His parents were proud. His father shook his hand like Werner was a real man now, not just his son. Ludwig looked at him with admiration. Helena made him a card with drawings of soldiers on it. Then the war started. Poland fell in weeks. The German war machine rolled forward like nothing could stop it. Werner's unit moved through France in May of 1940. They were unstoppable. They were superior. Everything they had been told was true. Until it wasn't. It happened fast during a battle near Dunkirk. One moment Werner was firing his rifle at British positions. The next moment British soldiers surrounded his unit. They came from 3 sides. Werner's squad ran out of ammunition after a 6-hour firefight. They were cut off from the main force. There was nowhere to go. Werner expected to die. He raised his hands. He waited for the bullets. But the British didn't shoot. They just walked up, took his weapon, and told him to sit down. They gave him water. One of them bandaged a cut on Werner's arm where shrapnel had grazed him. Werner sat there on the French dirt, drinking from a British canteen, trying to understand what was happening. Why weren't they killing him? The officers said the enemy was cruel, that they executed prisoners, but these British soldiers just looked tired. They sat nearby, smoking cigarettes. One of them offered Werner a cigarette. Werner took it with shaking hands. This was the first crack. Small, barely noticeable. But it was there. They put Werner and about 400 other German prisoners on trucks. Then they loaded them onto a ship. Werner had never seen the ocean before. For 9 days the ship crossed the Atlantic, grey waves and grey sky. The ocean seemed to go on forever. Some men got sick from the rocking. Others just stared at nothing. Werner expected cattle cars, chains, darkness, but they gave the prisoners bunks in the cargo hold, actual bunks with thin mattresses. They got soup and bread every day. Not much, but not starvation either. Nobody beat them. Nobody spit on them. The British guards were just doing a job. A guard told them they were going to Canada. Werner barely knew where that was. Somewhere far away, somewhere cold, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. When the ship finally docked in Halifax, they put the prisoners on trains. Not cattle cars. Passenger trains, with seats, with windows. Werner pressed his face against the glass and watched Canada roll by. This was the second crack. He saw forests that seemed to go on forever. Trees taller than any buildings in Hamburg, rivers as wide as roads, towns with clean streets and cars parked outside houses. Farms with huge red barns and green fields full of crops. Everything looked organized. Everything looked like it worked. The train kept going, hour after hour, day after day. Werner started to understand something that frightened him. Canada was massive. It was bigger than Germany, much bigger, and it looked rich. The infrastructure was everywhere. Power lines ran next to the tracks, roads crossed under bridges, factories sent smoke into the sky. Everything looked maintained. Everything looked like it had resources behind it. Werner had been told that Germany had the best of everything, the best roads, the best factories, the best technology. But looking out that train window, he wasn't so sure anymore. This didn't look like a weak country. This didn't look like a place that was losing. The train finally stopped at a small town in Alberta. Lethbridge, someone said. The prisoners got off and guards marched them down a dirt road. Werner expected to see walls rising up in the distance. He expected to see guard towers with searchlights. He expected to see what a real prison camp looked like. Instead, he saw wooden buildings arranged in neat rows. He saw a flagpole with a Canadian flag moving in the wind. He saw guards standing around, talking to each other. And he saw that horrible, impossible thing, no fence, no wall, nothing to keep them in, just open prairie land stretching away in every direction. The guards lined them up. A Canadian officer stood in front of them. He was older, maybe 50, with grey hair and a thick moustache. He spoke to them in German. His accent was rough but understandable. The officer said they were now prisoners of war. They would follow rules. They would work, if asked. But they would be treated fairly according to international law, according to something called the Geneva Convention. Werner had never heard of the Geneva Convention. He didn't know what international law meant, but he understood the officer's tone. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was just matter of fact, like a teacher explaining something obvious. Then the officer said something that made no sense. He said the camp had no fence because there was nowhere to run. They were 1,000 miles from Germany. If they tried to escape, they would die in the wilderness or freeze in the winter. It was safer to stay. Werner looked at the other prisoners. They all had the same confused look on their faces. Some men whispered to each other. Others just stared. One older soldier started laughing, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who realized something terrible. The guards walked them to their barracks. Werner expected a dark, cold building with straw on the floor. Instead, he found a clean wooden structure with real beds. Each bed had 2 blankets. There were windows with glass. There was a stove in the middle for heat. There were shelves for personal items. It looked better than some German army barracks Werner had slept in. Werner sat on his bed and touched the blanket. It was wool, thick, real. He looked around at the other prisoners. They were doing the same thing, touching things, looking at things, trying to understand. That first night, Werner lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling. Outside, he could hear the wind across the prairie. He could hear guards talking and laughing. He could hear nothing that sounded like a prison. And that scared him more than barbed wire ever could. The next morning a bell rang at 6. Werner got up expecting the worst. In the German army, mornings meant cold water and hard bread. Sometimes there was weak coffee. Usually there was shouting. He shuffled outside with the other prisoners and followed them toward a large building. Then the smell hit him before he even walked through the door. Bacon, real bacon, frying in pans. Werner stopped walking. The man behind him bumped into his back. Werner barely noticed. He just stood there breathing in that smell. When was the last time he had bacon? 2 years ago, maybe. Christmas at home. His mother had saved her ration coupons for weeks to buy enough bacon for the whole family. They each got 2 strips. It was a luxury, a treat, something special. His mouth started watering. His stomach made a noise. Inside the dining hall, Werner couldn't believe his eyes. Long tables filled the room. Canadian cooks stood behind a counter with huge pots and pans. Steam rose from everything. A cook waved the prisoners forward and started putting food on their plates. Scrambled eggs, 3 strips of bacon, 2 pieces of toast, real butter in little squares, a cup of coffee, and sugar on the table. Actual white sugar. Werner sat down and stared at his plate. This was more food than German soldiers got. This was more food than he had eaten in a single meal in months, maybe years. He picked up his fork and took a bite. The eggs were hot and fresh, fluffy, seasoned with salt and pepper. The bacon was crispy. The fat had rendered out perfectly, and the edges were dark and crunchy. The toast had real butter that melted into the bread, making it soft and rich. The coffee was strong and bitter and good. He ate slowly at first, trying to make it last, then faster. Then he couldn't stop. Around him, other prisoners ate the same way. Some men had tears in their eyes. Nobody spoke. They just ate. A guard walked by Werner's table. The guard was young, maybe 25. He had red hair and freckles. His name tag said Davies. He saw Werner staring at his empty plate, like he couldn't believe the food was gone. "There's more, if you want," Davies said in English. Werner didn't understand all the words, but he understood the gesture. The guard pointed at the serving line. Werner could go back. He could get more food. Werner didn't go back. He was too full. His stomach actually hurt from eating. When was the last time that happened? Later that day, another guard came to Werner's barracks. This guard was older, maybe 40. He had a kind face and a thick Canadian accent when he spoke German. "You can walk around the camp," the guard said. "Stay inside the boundary." Werner asked how far he could go. The guard led him outside and pointed to a line of white stones about 200 feet past the last building. "Don't cross that line," the guard said. "Everything on this side is fine." Then the guard walked away. He didn't watch Werner. He didn't follow him. He just left. Werner stood there for a moment trying to understand. Then he started walking, slowly. His heart beat fast. This had to be a test. They wanted to see if he would try to escape. They were watching him from somewhere. They had rifles pointed at him right now. But when he reached the white stones, nothing happened. No alarm went off. No guards came running. He just stood there at the edge of the camp, looking out at the prairie, miles and miles of grass and sky. The wind moved through the grass like waves on an ocean. He could see the road in the distance. He could see the line of trees beyond that. He could see the horizon where the land met the sky. He could just walk into that. He could try to run. But where would he go? The guard was right. There was nothing out there but empty land. Even if he walked for days, he would still be in Canada, still thousands of miles from home. And winter was coming. The guard had said men would freeze if they tried to escape. Werner stood at the line of white stones and felt the wind on his face. He was in a prison with no walls, a prison made of geography and distance and cold, a prison so confident in its own power that it didn't need fences. That was more terrifying than barbed wire. That was more terrifying than guard towers, because it meant the Canadians weren't afraid of him. They weren't afraid of any of the prisoners. They had so much power, so much confidence, that they could just let German soldiers walk around freely and know they would never escape. What kind of enemy was that? Werner walked back to his barracks slowly. His mind was spinning. Everything he had been told was starting to feel wrong. The enemy wasn't cruel. They fed him bacon and eggs for breakfast. They gave him real beds and warm blankets. They let him walk around without guards watching. Why? That night, Werner lay in his bed again, staring at the ceiling again. But this time, he was thinking different thoughts. This time, the crack in his mind was getting wider. Maybe, just maybe, he had been lied to. Over the next few weeks, Werner discovered even stranger things. The camp had a recreation hall. Inside were books in German and English, chess sets, checkerboards, card tables. Someone had donated a piano. It sat in the corner a little out of tune, but real. A prisoner named Otto Schultz had been a music teacher before the war. He was 32 from Berlin with thin fingers and round glasses. Otto started playing the piano in the evenings, simple pieces at first, then more complex ones. Other prisoners would gather to listen. The Canadian guards came too. They sat in the back of the room and listened. When Otto finished, they clapped. They actually clapped for a German prisoner playing German music. Werner sat in one of those concerts on a Wednesday night. The hall was dark except for a few lamps. Otto played something Werner didn't recognize, something soft and sad. The music filled the room, and Werner felt something in his chest loosen, something he didn't know was tight. Then Otto played something funny, a jaunty little tune that made people smile. Werner found himself laughing, actually laughing. When was the last time he laughed? Then he felt guilty for laughing. His brother was probably freezing somewhere in Russia right now. His mother was probably standing in a ration line. And here Werner was laughing at a concert like he was at a theatre in peacetime. Then he felt confused about feeling guilty. What was he supposed to do? Suffer every moment, refuse any small comfort? Would that help Ludwig or his mother? The thoughts spiraled. Werner left the concert early and walked back to his barracks in the dark. On Saturdays, the prisoners played soccer. They had organized teams by barracks. Different buildings played against each other. They made a league with standings and scores. The guards helped them mark out a proper field on the prairie grass. Someone found real soccer balls, not bundles of rags, real leather soccer balls. Werner played midfielder. He was fast and had good control. His team won 3 games in a row. After the third win, his teammates cheered and lifted him on their shoulders. For 10 seconds, Werner forgot he was a prisoner. For 10 seconds, he was just a young man playing soccer with friends on a sunny afternoon. Then he remembered, and the guilt came back. 4 weeks after arriving at the camp, a Canadian farmer came looking for workers. His name was Thornton. He was in his 50s with weathered skin and calloused hands. He needed help with the potato harvest. The guards asked for volunteers. Werner raised his hand. So did 15 other prisoners. They loaded into the back of Thornton's truck. No chains, no guards riding along, just prisoners and a farmer driving down a dirt road into the countryside. Thornton's farm was 20 miles from the camp. Fields of potatoes stretched out in rows. A white farmhouse sat on a small hill. A red barn stood nearby. Chickens wandered around the yard. The work was hard but honest, digging potatoes out of the earth, loading them into sacks, carrying the sacks to the truck. Werner's back ached by noon. His hands were covered in dirt, but it felt good somehow. It felt real. At lunch, Thornton's wife came out with sandwiches, ham and cheese on thick slices of bread. She had a pitcher of lemonade, actual lemonade with ice in it. Werner sat under a tree and ate his sandwich slowly. The ham was real, the cheese was sharp and tangy, the lemonade was sweet and cold and perfect. He hadn't had lemonade since he was a child. His mother used to make it on hot summer days. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was back in Hamburg. He was 10 years old, sitting in the small garden behind their apartment building. His mother was pouring lemonade into glasses. Ludwig was chasing Helene around the garden, both of them laughing. Then he opened his eyes, and he was in Canada. He was 24 and a prisoner, and his childhood was gone forever. At the end of the day, Thornton paid each prisoner 50 cents. The money would go into special accounts in Switzerland that they could access after the war, if there was an after the war, if they survived that long. Thornton told them to come back Monday if they wanted. Same work, same pay. Werner went back every Monday for 3 weeks. The work became familiar. The routine became comfortable. Thornton's wife learned Werner's name. She started saving him extra sandwiches. On the 3rd week, something happened that Werner would remember for the rest of his life. It was late afternoon. The sun was getting low. Most of the potatoes were harvested. Werner was working alone in the far field when Thornton walked up carrying something, a shotgun. Werner's whole body tensed. This was it. This was the moment. They had been setting him up all along, being kind, feeding him, making him comfortable. And now Thornton would shoot him in this field and tell the guards he tried to escape. But Thornton didn't point the gun at Werner. He held it out, offering it. "Gophers," Thornton said in his thick accent, "eating my crops. Shoot them if you see any." Then Thornton walked away, just turned around and walked back toward the barn. Werner stood there holding the shotgun, a loaded shotgun. He could feel the weight of it. He could feel the shells in the chamber. His hands were shaking. He looked at the gun. Then he looked at Thornton walking away. Then he looked across the field toward the road. He could see Thornton's house from here. He could see Thornton's wife hanging laundry on a clothesline. He could see 2 children playing in the yard. A boy who looked about 10, a girl who looked about 7. Werner raised the shotgun, not at Thornton, at the sky, just to feel what it felt like to hold a weapon again. He could shoot Thornton right now. The man's back was turned. Werner was a trained soldier. He wouldn't miss from this distance. Then he could take the truck, drive to the American border, maybe make it to a port, maybe steal a boat, maybe. Or more likely he would get caught within a day. And even if he didn't, where would he go? Back to Germany, back to the army, back to fighting a war. He was starting to realize Germany might not win. Werner lowered the gun. He looked at the children playing. The boy was pushing the girl on a tire swing. She was laughing. The sound carried across the field. Thornton had just given him lemonade and a ham sandwich. Thornton's wife had learned his name. They treated him like a regular farmhand, not like the enemy. And Thornton had trusted him with a loaded gun. What kind of enemy does that Werner spent the next 2 hours shooting gophers? He got 7 of them. When the sun started to set, he walked back to the barn and handed the gun to Thornton. "Good work," Thornton said. "See you Monday." That was it. No suspicion, no drama, just a farmer thanking a worker for doing a job. That night Werner lay in his barracks bunk and thought about the shotgun, about Thornton's back turned, about the children on the swing, about the choice he had made. He had chosen not to run, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. That realization terrified him more than anything else so far. The letters from home started arriving in October 1941. The camp commander announced that prisoners could send and receive mail through the Red Cross. It would take months for letters to travel back and forth, but it was something. Werner wrote to his mother immediately. He kept the letter simple. He said he was safe. He said he was healthy. He said not to worry. He didn't tell her about the bacon and eggs. He didn't tell her about the concerts and the soccer games. He didn't tell her about the shotgun. How could he explain any of that? Her reply came in December, 3 months later. The envelope was thin and wrinkled. The handwriting was his mother's, but shakier than he remembered. Werner sat on his bunk and opened it slowly. The letter was 2 pages. His mother's words were careful, trying to sound cheerful. But Werner could read between the lines. Air raids had started in Hamburg. The family hid in the basement during bombings. Ludwig had been drafted. He was 19 now. They sent him to the Eastern Front, to Russia. His mother wrote that Ludwig was doing fine, but Werner knew what Russia meant. Freezing cold, no supplies, men dying by the thousands. Helena was working in an ammunition factory. She was 15. His mother wrote that Helena was helping the war effort, that she was proud, but Werner imagined his baby sister standing at a factory line for 12 hours a day, making bullets and shells. Food rations were getting tighter, 1 egg per week. Meat was rare. His mother wrote that they were managing, that they had enough. But then she asked, "Werner, are you eating enough? We worry so much. Please tell us you're being fed." Werner folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Then he walked to the dining hall. It was dinner time. The cooks were serving roasted chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans. There was gravy. There was bread with butter. There was pie for dessert. Werner got his plate and sat down. He looked at the food. More food than his mother probably saw in a week. He thought about her asking if he was eating enough. He thought about Ludwig in Russia. He thought about Helena in the factory. Then he ate. Because what else could he do? Starve himself in solidarity? That wouldn't help them. That wouldn't change anything. But it felt wrong. Every bite felt wrong. The letters kept coming. One every few months, each one a little worse than the last. In spring 1942, his mother wrote that coal rations had been cut. They were freezing in the apartment. She wore her coat inside the house. They went to bed at 7 in the evening because it was too cold to stay up. Ludwig's letters from Russia were short and heavily censored, but his mother included pieces of them. Ludwig wrote about the cold, about men losing fingers and toes to frostbite, about how there were never enough supplies. Helene's factory had been bombed. 40 workers died. Helene survived because she had been in the bathroom when the bombs hit. His mother wrote this in 2 sentences, trying to make it sound like good luck, like they should be grateful. The bread in Germany now had sawdust mixed in. His mother wrote that it tasted terrible, but it was better than nothing. Werner read that letter after Sunday dinner. He had just eaten roast beef with mashed potatoes and gravy. He had eaten until he was full. He had eaten pie with real whipped cream on top. His mother was eating bread with sawdust. He folded the letter carefully and put it with the others. He had a small stack of them now, tied with string, hidden in his pillowcase. Evidence, proof, documentation of what was happening while he lived in comfort. December 1942 came and went, then January, then February. Werner waited for another letter. Nothing came. Finally, in March 1943, a letter arrived. The envelope was thinner than usual. Werner's stomach dropped before he even opened it. His mother's handwriting was shakier than ever. The letter was short. Ludwig was killed in January at Stalingrad. He froze to death during the retreat. They never recovered his body. He was 21 years old. Werner read the words 3 times, 4 times. They didn't make sense. Ludwig couldn't be dead. Ludwig was supposed to survive. He was supposed to come home. He was supposed to build motorcycles. Werner had just played soccer that morning. His team had won. He had scored a goal. He had been happy. He had been laughing and joking with his teammates 20 minutes before walking to the mailroom. Ludwig was dead, had been dead for 2 months, and Werner had been playing games. That night, Werner didn't go to dinner. He lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. Outside, he could hear other prisoners talking. Someone was playing the piano in the rec hall. Someone else was laughing. Werner thought about Ludwig at 16 taking apart the neighbor's radio to see how it worked. He thought about Ludwig at 17 getting his draft notice, trying to look brave. He thought about Ludwig at 21, freezing to death in the Russian snow, probably scared, probably crying for his mother. And Werner thought about himself, safe, warm, well-fed, playing soccer, listening to concerts, living better as a prisoner than he ever had as a soldier. Why? The question wouldn't leave him alone. Why was he here comfortable while his brother died freezing? Why did the enemy treat him better than his own country treated its citizens? Why did Canada have so much food they could feed prisoners 3 meals a day, while Germany couldn't feed its own people? Werner had been told his whole life that Germany was superior, that Germans were the master race, that they had the best of everything. The best soldiers, the best technology, the best country. But if that was true, why was he gaining weight while Germans starved? Why did this camp have heating stoves and glass windows while people in Hamburg froze? Why could Canada afford to be kind while Germany could only afford to be cruel? The crack in Werner's mind that started with the bacon breakfast, that widened with the shotgun, that deepened with every letter from home, that crack finally split wide open. Maybe Germany wasn't superior. Maybe they had been lied to. Maybe everything was a lie. The thought was terrifying. It meant his whole world was built on nothing. It meant Ludwig died for nothing. It meant Werner had believed in something false and evil, and now he had to live with that knowledge. He couldn't unsee it now. He couldn't go back to believing. The truth was right in front of him every single day, in every meal, in every warm night, in every kind gesture from guards who were supposed to be cruel. Werner stopped going to the soccer games. He stopped going to concerts. He worked on the farm, and he came back, and he lay in his bunk, and he thought about Ludwig freezing to death, while Werner ate pie. Weeks passed like this. Spring turned to summer. Summer turned to fall. Werner moved through the days like a ghost. Then December came again. December 1943. 3 years since Werner had been captured. 3 years in this prison with no walls. On December the 24th, the camp commander made an announcement at lunch. Tonight, there would be a special Christmas dinner. Everyone would attend. There would be guests from the town. Werner didn't care. He barely listened. Christmas didn't mean anything anymore, not without Ludwig, not while his mother and sister suffered. But that evening, a guard came to Werner's barracks and told everyone to go to the dining hall. It wasn't optional. Werner walked through the snow. The sun was setting. The sky turned orange and pink. His breath made clouds in the cold air. He could see the dining hall in the distance. Light glowed from the windows. He opened the door and warm air rushed over him like a wave. The smell hit him first. Roasted meat, baked bread, something sweet, pine from a Christmas tree, candles burning. Werner stopped in the doorway and stared. The dining hall looked different. The tables had white cloths over them. Real plates sat at each spot instead of the metal trays. There were glasses for drinks, folded napkins. In the corner, a small Christmas tree stood with real candles on the branches. Their light danced and flickered. Other prisoners filed in around Werner. Everyone got quiet. 300 men standing in a room that smelled like Christmas, like home, like a memory from before the war ruined everything. Then the Canadian cook started bringing out the food. Platters, huge platters carried by 2 men each. Roasted turkeys, whole birds, golden brown, glistening with fat. The skin was crispy. Steam rose from them when the cook set them on the tables. Baked hams with a dark, sweet glaze coating the outside. The smell of sugar and cloves and meat filled the room. Mashed potatoes in enormous bowls. Butter melted on top, forming little yellow pools that reflected the candlelight. Carrots and green beans. Bright colors. Clearly fresh, not from cans. Butter on both. Fresh bread rolls, still hot from the oven. When someone broke, one open steam rose from the soft white inside. Gravy in bowls, thick and rich and brown. Cranberry sauce that looked like dark red jewels. Werner sat down at a table. He stared at the food in front of him. This was more than food. This was abundance. This was wealth. This was proof of everything he had been realizing for 3 years. A guard walked by and poured something into Werner's glass. Beer. Real beer. Not much, maybe 4 ounces, but real. Werner picked up his fork and knife. Around him, 300 German prisoners did the same. For a moment, nobody moved. The room was silent except for the crackling candles. Then someone started eating. Then everyone did. The sound of 300 men eating filled the hall, forks on plates, knives cutting meat, glasses being set down, quiet murmurs. Werner cut into the turkey. The meat fell apart, tender and juicy, seasoned with salt and herbs. Butter had been rubbed under the skin before roasting. Warmth spread through his chest as he swallowed. The ham was sweet and salty at once, sugar and cloves and honey in the glaze. The mashed potatoes were smooth with real butter. The vegetables were fresh and bright. The bread roll was soft inside with a crispy crust that crackled when he bit it. Each bite was warmth. Each bite was proof. Werner ate and ate. He ate until his stomach hurt. Then he ate more. He couldn't stop. This might never happen again. He had to eat everything he could. Around the room, other men were doing the same. Some had tears running down their faces while they ate. Nobody talked. This was sacred, somehow. This was a gift they didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. Werner thought about his mother in Hamburg. She was probably eating thin soup tonight, maybe a small piece of bread. That sawdust bread she had written about. This plate in front of him was probably more food than she would see in a week. Maybe a month. Ludwig would never eat again. Ludwig froze to death in Russia, while Werner sat here eating turkey and ham. The guilt crashed over Werner like a wave, but his body wouldn't let him stop eating. His stomach demanded more. His hands kept moving, fork to plate, plate to mouth, over and over. This was the war in miniature. This was everything wrong with the world on one table. The enemy had so much they could throw feasts for prisoners. His own country had so little they mixed sawdust into bread. How could Germany be superior? How could this be the master race? Werner set down his fork. His plate was empty. His stomach was painfully full. Around him, men were still eating. The platters were almost empty now. 300 men had eaten like kings. Then the door to the dining hall opened. Cold air blew in. Werner looked up. People walked in. Canadian people from the town of Lethbridge. Men and women. Even children. They carried boxes and bags. Werner tensed. What was happening now? But the Canadians were smiling. They walked around the tables and started handing out gifts. A bar of chocolate to this prisoner, a pack of cigarettes to that one, a pair of warm socks, a book in German, small things, but real gifts, chosen, wrapped. A woman with grey hair stopped at Werner's place. She looked about 60 years old. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but her eyes were kind. She wore a simple wool coat and a scarf around her neck. She held out a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Merry Christmas, young man," she said in English. Werner took the package with shaking hands. The woman waited, watching him with that kind smile. Werner's fingers fumbled with the string. He untied it slowly. The paper crinkled as he unwrapped it. Inside was a wool scarf, dark blue, handmade. He could see it immediately, knitted with care. Werner held it up and examined it. The stitches were even and tight. Not loose or sloppy, the wool was soft, good quality. The pattern was simple but elegant. This took skill. This took time. This took hours of work. He looked up at the woman. She was still smiling. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. She reached out and patted his shoulder with a gloved hand. She said something else in English that Werner didn't fully understand, but the tone was kind, gentle. Then she moved on to the next prisoner. Werner sat there holding the scarf. Something was breaking inside his chest. Not a painful break, a releasing break, like ice cracking in spring. This woman had made this scarf with her own hands. She had spent hours knitting it. For him, for a German soldier, for a man whose country was trying to kill her country's soldiers, for the enemy. Why? She didn't know him. He wasn't her son, or her brother, or her friend. He was the enemy. But she had made this with care, not because she had to, because she chose to, not out of duty. Out of kindness, Werner stared at the scarf and felt everything he thought he knew about the world collapse. Then someone started singing, a prisoner with a strong voice. Werner didn't know his name. The man stood up and began singing Stille Nacht in German, silent night, holy night. Other voices joined in, more and more. Werner's voice joined too. He hadn't sung in years. His voice cracked, but he kept going. Then something miraculous happened. The Canadian Guards started singing the same song, but in English. Silent night, holy night. The townspeople joined in, two languages mixing together in the same room, the same melody, the same words in different tongues, the same hope for peace. Werner sang and looked around through wet eyes. He saw German prisoners with full stomachs, warm, safe. He saw Canadian guards with gentle faces, no hatred in their eyes. He saw townspeople who had brought gifts, who had given their time. He saw the Christmas tree with its candles flickering. He saw the empty plates that had held more food than anyone in Germany would see this year. And Werner understood completely. These people didn't hate him. They didn't want revenge. They pitied him. They felt sorry for him. They knew he had been lied to. They knew he came from a place that was falling apart. And instead of being cruel, they showed him what a real country looked like. A country with so much it could give feasts to enemies. A country so confident it didn't need fences. A country so strong it could afford to be kind. Werner thought about the propaganda posters back home, about the speeches that said Germans were the master race, about the promises of German superiority, about the new world order they were building. Then he thought about his mother eating bread with sawdust, about Ludwig freezing to death at 21, about Helena hiding in a basement from bombs, about German cities being destroyed, about German soldiers dying by the millions, about German children starving. And here Werner sat, the enemy prisoner, full of turkey and ham, warm and safe, with a handmade scarf from a kind stranger. How could Germany be superior when it couldn't feed its own people? How could Germany be the master race when it was losing to countries that threw Christmas feasts for prisoners? How could any of it be true? The propaganda was a lie, all of it, everything. Werner couldn't unsee it now. The crack in his mind had split completely open. There was no going back, ever. That night, Werner lay in his bunk holding the blue scarf. Outside, snow fell silently. Inside, the stove glowed warm. His stomach was full. His body was healthy. He had gained 30 pounds since arriving in Canada. 30 pounds, while his country starved. Werner stopped being a German soldier who believed in the cause. He became just a man who saw the truth. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered. Werner heard the news in the barracks. Some prisoners cried, some sat in silence, some looked relieved. Werner felt nothing, just emptiness. He stayed at the camp for another year. The Canadians didn't send them home immediately. There was nowhere to send them. Germany was destroyed, occupied, divided. The victors were still figuring out what to do with it. Finally, in May 1946, they put Werner on a ship going home. The word felt strange. Where was home now? Werner packed his small bag. English textbooks he had studied, a Canadian farming manual, photographs of the camp, pictures of prisoners playing soccer, a photograph of the Christmas dinner from 1943, and the blue scarf, worn soft from 3 years of use. These were his treasures, proof that it had been real. The ship pulled away from Halifax. Werner stood on deck, watching Canada shrink in the distance. Other prisoners stood with him. Nobody talked much. They all knew what they were going back to. The letters had prepared them. Germany was rubble, cities destroyed, millions dead. The country divided between the winners. No food, no jobs, no future anyone could see clearly. Werner crossed the Atlantic again. The same ocean, the opposite direction. But he was a different person now. He spoke English. He knew how to fix tractors and work farms. He understood how democracies worked. He had seen what a country looked like when it treated people with dignity. He had learned that propaganda was just lies wrapped in a flag. The old Werner, who believed, was dead. This new Werner didn't know what he believed anymore, except maybe kindness and truth and the importance of a good meal. The ship docked in Hamburg in early June. Werner walked down the ramp and stepped onto German soil for the first time in 6 years. The smell hit him first, smoke and dust and something rotten, something dead. Then he looked around, and his heart sank. Hamburg wasn't a city anymore. It was a graveyard. Buildings stood like broken teeth. Whole blocks were just piles of bricks and rubble. People walked through the streets like ghosts. Thin people, dirty people, people with empty eyes. Werner walked through the ruined streets. Every corner brought new horror. A church with no roof, a school that was just one wall, a park that was now a crater. He passed people digging through rubble looking for anything useful. Children with hollow cheeks begged for food. Old women pushed carts full of broken things they hoped to trade. This was Germany. This was the master race. This was what superiority looked like. It took Werner 3 days to reach his mother's apartment, 3 days of walking and hitching rides on army trucks, 3 days of seeing nothing but destruction. When he finally knocked on the door, he barely recognized the woman who opened it. His mother had aged 20 years in 6. Her hair was completely white. Her face was lined and thin. Her hands shook. She saw Werner and screamed. Then she cried. Then she touched his face like she couldn't believe he was real. She pulled him inside. The apartment was cold, even though it was summer. Half the windows were boarded up. Most of the furniture was gone, probably burned for heat during the winter. His mother made him sit down. She stared at him. "You're so healthy," she kept saying. "Look at you. You're so healthy." Werner realized he probably weighed 40 pounds more than her. He had color in his face. She looked grey. His mother made tea. There was no real tea, so it was made from dried leaves and roots boiled in water. She put a small piece of bread on a plate. "This is half my ration for today," she said. "But you need to eat." Werner looked at the bread. It was dark and hard, maybe 2 inches across. This was half a day's food. He thought about breakfast in Canada. Eggs and bacon and toast with butter. eating until he was full, until he couldn't eat anymore. He couldn't eat his mother's bread. He pushed it back to her. They argued. Finally, they split it. Neither piece was enough to stop hunger. Over the next few days, Werner learned what life was like now. Food rations were 1,200 calories per day, less than half what he got as a prisoner. People stood in line for hours to get their bread and potatoes. The black market was the only place to get real food, but it cost more than anyone had. Ludwig was confirmed dead. Stalingrad, January 1943, 21 years old. Helena had survived. She was 22 now, but her husband was missing, probably dead in a camp somewhere. She lived with their mother. She worked in a factory that made parts for rebuilding. She looked 10 years older than she should. People asked Werner about the prison camp. He tried to explain. The food, the warm barracks, the lack of fences, the Christmas dinner, the Canadian families who brought gifts. They looked at him like he was crazy. One neighbor got angry. "You got fat while we starved," the man said. "You were safe while we got bombed." Werner understood the anger. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. He had been the enemy and got treated better than German citizens. At night, Werner lay on a thin mattress in his childhood room, the same room where he had slept before the war. But everything was different now. The window was cracked. The walls had water damage. It was cold and damp and dark. He thought about his bed in Canada. The 2 blankets, the warm stove, the full stomach. In Canada, he had been a prisoner, but he could walk freely. He had hope. He had food. He had friends. He had purpose. Here he was free, but felt trapped by hunger and cold and despair. Werner missed Canada. He actually missed being a prisoner of war. How was that possible? How could captivity be better than freedom? But it was true. Months passed. Werner helped rebuild Hamburg. He used his farming skills to work on a farm outside the city. The farmer paid him in food, potatoes mostly, sometimes an egg. Werner gave most of it to his mother. He watched her eat and thought about the Christmas turkey, the ham, the fresh bread, the butter, all of it given to prisoners while German civilians starved. In 1948, Werner heard news. Some former prisoners were going back to Canada. The Canadian government was letting them immigrate. There was land, jobs, a future. Over 6,000 German prisoners made that choice. They left Germany and went back to the country that had held them captive. They married Canadian women. They became farmers and businessmen. They built new lives in a land that had shown them mercy. Werner thought about it every day. He could go back. He could have a real life. But his mother, his sister, could he abandon them? Werner stayed. Because of family, because of duty, because someone had to help rebuild. But he kept his treasures. The English books, the photographs, the blue scarf. Years passed. Werner married. He had children. He told them stories about the camp with no fences, about the guard who said, "You can go for a walk if you want," about the Christmas dinner that changed everything. He taught them what he had learned. "Canada won the war before they ever fought us," he told them. "They won by showing us what we could have been. They defeated us not by breaking our bodies, but by proving we had been lied to all along." "The strongest prison isn't made of wire and walls," he said. "It's made of lies you believe about yourself and others. And the only way to escape is for someone to be kind enough to show you the truth." In 1983, Werner was 67 years old. He lived quietly in rebuilt Hamburg. The city had recovered. Germany had recovered. But Werner never forgot. One day in November, a letter arrived. Canadian stamp. The handwriting was shaky. Werner opened it with trembling hands. It was from a woman named Margaret Caldwell. She lived in Lethbridge, Alberta. She was 90 years old. I knitted scarves for 50 prisoners that Christmas in 1943, she wrote. You are the only one who ever wrote back to thank me. Your letter arrived in 1947. I kept it all these years. I wanted you to know I never regretted that kindness. I hope the scarf kept you warm. I hope you found peace. Thank you for living a good life. That was all I hoped for. Werner read the letter and wept. For the first time since Ludwig died, he cried. Not sad tears, healing tears. This woman had remembered him. She had cared enough to write 40 years later. Werner wrote back immediately. The scarf kept me warm for 3 years in camp. I still have it. I will keep it until I die. You showed me what humanity looks like. You taught me that enemies can become friends. You saved my soul, not just my body. Thank you will never be enough. Werner died peacefully in his sleep on a January night in 1984. He was 68 years old. His grandchildren found him the next morning. The blue scarf was folded on his chest. Margaret's letter was tucked inside. At the funeral, his oldest grandson read both letters aloud. Werner's letter to Margaret, Margaret's letter back. The grandson's voice shook when he read Werner's final line, You saved my soul, not just my body. He folded the letters carefully and placed them in the coffin alongside the blue scarf. 3 generations stood in the rebuilt Hamburg cemetery. They understood what Werner had spent 40 years teaching them. Kindness can defeat hatred. Truth can shatter lies. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't violence. It's showing your enemy they were wrong about you. And maybe, just maybe, wrong about themselves. In Werner's mind, until his last breath, he could still taste the Christmas turkey. He could still feel the warmth of the barracks stove. He could still hear Silent Night sung in Too Loud 2 languages. He could still see the face of the woman who gave him a scarf for no reason except that it was Christmas and he was human, and that was enough.